welcome. Come on in. How are you, Lisa? Yes.
Okay.
And the reason that we're doing this is we are going to use this videotape for people who are new and who want to see and want to learn, but maybe haven't even made it yet to the campuses, because there's always people who come on board who are new for our 7 RRISE campuses, because you all are one of 7 campuses that are with the RRISE grant. And so, as you know, there's a lot of things that are involved in the RRISE grant, and one of the ones that I think causes probably the most concern, or kind of that stress that you feel, happens to be the observation. And I think that's just a natural part of teaching, is that, good teachers, you're thoughtful, and you're always just, whenever someone walks in the door, I remember as a teacher that you have that little feeling like, all right, welcome, come in. So anyway, this is the Snapshot tool, and so I wanted to go through it more specifically with you, because I think if you understand it more clearly, first of all, it will alleviate some of your stress level, and in addition, I think having that better understanding then helps you prepare, because this is just good teaching. So a lot of the things that are on here are just naturally things that you do when you're teaching. And all of the research that went into this Snapshot tool has been done by Robert Marzano. There's like 12 people who have gone into the research that has been done for this particular Snapshot tool. And the guy who is responsible for it, and you'll see at the bottom, I put them out there for you, the tools, is Dr. Michael Murphy. And he has actually trained us on the use of this tool, and it's his tool essentially. We've just made some modifications in terms of the definition, and it's really more to help teachers understand what that indicator is. So I'm going to go through the format of the tool first, and then talk about each of the indicators. So the first thing that you need to know is that there are headings, or what we call domains. And so in this case, the responsive brain-based classroom, that's the domain name. And then under it, you'll see 3 components. And the components' names are classroom instructional design, and then the next bold one down here, the teacher instructional strategies, and then the student responsiveness. And under each of those components is what we call an indicator. And the indicators are really, I think, where most of the focus winds up being. The indicators are essentially where you get credit or denial for that particular item. And next to that indicator is the operational definition. If you want to know more information about the indicator, read through that operational definition, because that's where you really get that better understanding of what they're talking about, or what we are talking about with each indicator. So I'm going to go through each of them, and I'm going to highlight for you some words, and you may want to underline these words, because I think if you look at the whole document, it's 4 pages, it can be lengthy. So if I highlight some of the big key words for you, I think that's really helpful. And so the first part is all about classroom instructional design. That's the component title. And the classroom instructional design is really essentially, how did you set up your classroom? How did you design your classroom? And what was the thoughts and the planning that went into it? So the first thing is student work. Do you have student work up? That's really it. Student work up in your classroom. Well, student work with also the idea that it's an example or an exemplary work. So it's something that's good that the kids can refer to. And it's like having your good work bulletin boards up. The second thing has to do with grouping areas in open space, and that's really what it means. Can you walk through your classroom with ease, or are the kids bumping into each other? Are they sitting all compacted? Hi, Cheryl.
Hi,
welcome.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Come on in. Come on in.
Racing.
That's okay. We're only on the second one, so you haven't missed much of anything.
Okay.
So then the group areas and open spaces, basically, do you have, if you're going to bring the kids to the floor, do you have an open, large enough space for them? And then in the seating assignments, do you have space for them where they're seated? And is that space where you can walk around, and how does it flow? So essentially it's just, is there enough space there? Attractive, rich learning environment. Here's the thing that people tend to, especially in elementary, this is one of the things that kind of gets you right here. Being careful to avoid clutter, because a lot of times in our elementary classrooms, we have a lot of things up. A lot of things, especially as we're doing our anchor charts and we've got these great word walls and all the things that you might have up there. They don't have to be store-bought. It's especially kid-made with you in the classroom. So those are the things that we want to see up there as an attractive, rich learning environment without it being so overwhelming that kids can shut down. And so when you walk in the classroom, you can almost feel it like, oh, there's so much up there. So I would say you want enough that it's well organized where it is, but not too overwhelming where you really, the kids don't even know where to focus. Does that make sense? And then the next piece has to do with efficient pacing of instructional time. And this, here's the key words here. No inappropriate lags in instruction. And what that means is essentially while you're having the pacing, while you're going through the lesson, is there a time where kids don't have anything to do or there's nothing happening? And typically you'll see that what happens is when you don't have really good pacing, other indicators, which we'll talk about, kind of get missed on
Miguel
that as
Cantu,
well.
can you please report to Mrs. Cantu's room?
Such as if you have a problem with efficient pacing, it might also hit you under engagement, it might hit you under classroom routines and procedures, because maybe that's what the reason is for the pacing slowing down, that they're no longer engaged, and so on. So I'm going to stop right there under classroom instructional design and just see, do you all have questions so far on this particular component? Quiet. Make sense? Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to teacher instructional strategies. And teacher instructional strategies, here the key thing is, do you have more than one resource for your kids? And what that means is, do they have their peers that can help them? Do you have an anchor chart that you refer them to? Do they have a textbook that they're working from? Do they have manipulatives? Do you have displays? Essentially, it's just more than one resource during the 20 minutes that we're in there to see that there's something else for them to refer to, besides always going to the teacher. Does that make sense? The next one has to do with a variety of teacher-directed strategies. So here, the key thing is multiple learning strategies. And that is very broad and very large. And essentially, the whole idea is, are the kids successful in achieving the target? That's the key there. If you are working with students and you've got one particular strategy and it is working and the kids are doing well, that's great. Good. Keep that up. If you see kids who are struggling and you don't change your strategy, that's where you'll get denied the credit, because if there are kids who are struggling, then obviously you need to do something different. And that's what the whole thing is talking about with multiple strategies. In terms of assessment, you're strictly looking at informal and formal assessment. So it can be informal in terms of you're observing, you're walking around and observing the kids, and you're checking on each one as you're walking around. That's an informal observation. But if you're really checking for behavior rather than what they're working on, that would not meet that need, because really that's monitoring behavior rather than monitoring their work. And so the other part of that is you could even make, and I've seen it here, done here on this campus really well, is an informal assessment that turned into a formal assessment through anecdotal records. So you're walking around and taking those observations, but you're also taking notes as you go. Wow, you're doing two things at once. And then the very formal also being testing and those kinds of things as well. We don't want to come in, if you are doing a test or you have some benchmark going on, let us know, because we don't want to stay for that. That's not really going to be a good assessment and a good observation of you. So you just tell us and we'll scooch out and come back. But we do want to see that you are checking for understanding for the kids, and here is where that fits in. And the last one under teacher instructional strategies is your information clear? And are you building on a sequence? You know the old lesson sequence? Hi, welcome, come in. You know that old lesson sequence design? We think of kind of Madeline Hunter and how you design your lesson and the sequence of it. Is there a logical sequence to your lesson? Does it have to be Madeline Hunter? No, you're not going to get that done in 20 minutes. But does it make sense? And is the information or the communication that you're doing, does it make sense and is it clear? That's the main goal there. So that is all that the teacher instructional strategies component has. Does anybody have any questions about those? Okay, I'm going to move a little quicker. You guys are gifted here. All right, so the next one, the last one, is the student responsiveness. And it sounds like what it is. It's how do the students respond? And that has to do with how efficient are they at taking responsibility for the classroom functioning. So you see this if you've ever done Dana Center walkthroughs or ever worked with them. They talk a lot about if the teacher walked out of the room, how would the class work? Would they continue or would it be just total chaos? And that's really what we're talking about here. What kinds of routines and procedures did you put in place that essentially they can manage without you there? And then the other part is the transitions. And you guys have been focused a lot on transitions from what I understand here. And what we're looking at is not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a transition as in you're going from the classroom to the hallway, or you're going out to recess or to lunch or whatever. This is transitioning even within activities. So how do you get the kids from sitting down with you in a large group to then moving to a small group? How do you transition the kids from teaching math to now we're working on language arts? Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at with student movement. So it's not always student movement, but it's how well do you transition the kids. It certainly can be student movement, but it doesn't have to be. And that's it to student responsiveness. Y'all have questions on that?
I do, and I'm not sure that I may have this problem, but others may. Let's say, for example, for 20 minutes that you're in there, you don't see that transition because I'm in my math, I'm in the meat of it. You're there 20 minutes, we're not going to transition. Now we may transition from a whole group lesson to more of a menu type lesson.
Right.
So there, you would see it there.
Yes.
But not necessarily from a reading to a map or per se.
Absolutely. It's as appropriate. So if it's not appropriate, I will say that in 20 minutes with especially younger kids, I would hope that there's a transition.
Absolutely.
For their brain within like 7 minutes. I mean that's typically what the idea is behind the transitions. So what you said with moving from the large group to the small group activity, but it's still the same activity, it doesn't have to be a whole change of subject, that's a transition. Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, that counts. And again, if it's not appropriate, let's say you're working on a lab and all the kids are working on the lab, and I come in the middle of it. Okay, keep going.
Right.
Good, great. That you wouldn't necessarily need a transition there.
Do you ever have a trouble seeing that? I mean, does it ever happen where, gosh,
Very rarely.
every time I walk in, I'm in the middle and I never see that transition.
I can almost count on one hand maybe the times that I have not seen a transition, especially in an elementary classroom.
Okay.
Because I also see middle school, so.
Is this where, when last week we were talking about even talking and turning and are considered transitions because they're doing different things within
That is exactly
the lesson?
right. Yes, that's right, Lisa. So you can be, having this conversation with them and then you tell them to turn and talk. That's a transition.
Okay.
Absolutely. So it doesn't have to be the big we think of actual moving.
Okay.
But actually in this case they are moving their body. It's just minor movement.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Great question. Okay, so second page. This one has to do with engaging student tasks. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this than I will on all of the others, because this is where typically we see teachers who don't necessarily get the points here. And so I want to make it really, really clear so that you understand it, one, and that you can see why it's important. So again, the domain is engaging student tasks, and then under there, the two components are content design and content delivery. Content design is how did you plan your lesson? What did you do to plan the lesson? It all has to do with the content planning. Now, I'm not sitting in your planning and I don't know what you've done during your planning, but it comes out as evident, especially through your content delivery. And so we can see where you might not have necessarily planned for something. So here, the kinds of things that we're looking at is respectful tasks for all students. This means that it's at their level and it encourages or challenges them to move forward. So it's not too low, it's not too high, it's appropriate for the kids. And this comes in too with differentiation. But the respectful task idea is that, one, you're meeting, you're going to have to, I know, stick to the arc, but it also encourages the kids to challenge them and to move forward without holding them back. So I'm not giving you something that's not your reading level, too low on your reading level or too high on your reading level. I'm giving you the task that's appropriate for you. So I'm going to put here, the focus is on the tasks. Okay. Kinds of tasks. And this really is, again, really focusing on what the students need. So you can see that even though I wasn't sitting in your planning, I would know that you planned for it based on what you do with the kids. Does that make sense? That's why it's content design. Now the focus on the student understanding, here I'm going to put here, not simply covering the content. I'm just highlighting not simply covering the content. Sometimes we see that we're in a hurry to teach and we have a lot to teach and a lot on our plate, and so we don't go deep. We just have this very, you've heard the inch thin versus going deeper in terms of the instruction, and that's where this comes in. Is the tasks that you're asking, are the tasks that you're asking the students to do at a very minimal level where you're just covering the content but they don't really have that deep understanding? And that's what we're looking for here. And again, you see how that's all about the planning to how you got there. The next one, which is inquiry and experience-based, this is, you can get it two ways. One is inquiry, the other is experience, but it's combined, so if you do either of these, you get the credit for it. So the first one has to do with the student's natural inquisitiveness. You know, kids come to us excited, they have lots of questions, they're learning. Do you foster that inquisitiveness, and do you facilitate it through the kinds of planning of lessons that you're doing? In other words, is your lesson about inquiry? Is it about getting the kids to solve problems and to work through their thinking and to really get them motivated because they're naturally interested in it? That's what students' natural inquisitiveness is. And the other part is really about establishing a common background experience. If you haven't read Robert Marzano's Building Background Knowledge, that's a great book, and it's really about how do you tap into getting students to connect their thinking when they haven't had the background knowledge to move forward, because we all know that your dendrites need to make those connections to either something that you've experienced or you've learned. So how do you establish that common background experience before you move forward in the lesson? And so that's the experience-based part. You're creating this experience for the kids that may not have had it, and then you're building upon that. These two are the most missed from last year. In all schools, these two are the most missed. The first one is we've changed it. We wanted to make it really, really clear, because before it said focus on real-world application. We asked Dr. Murphy for permission, and he said yes, that we changed it to the focus on the value outside the school setting to make it more clear. You're really getting at here, what is the value and importance beyond the classroom? And it has to be overtly stated. Do you have to say the value and importance of this lesson is? No, no. Do you have to get the kids to, do you have to be the one to state it? No, your kids can state it. So, in other words, you might ask the kids, why is this important to your lives? When are you ever going to see this? When are you going to use this? See, I still didn't use value and importance, but I still am getting at the same thing. And the kids give you the answer back. You get credit for that. You also might be the one to state, this is when you're going to see this. When you go out to the grocery store, this is where you're going to see it. But it can't be a connection within the classroom. Sometimes teachers will say, you're going to use, if you're a second grade teacher, you're going to need to know this because in third grade, that's not going to get it because that's not outside the school setting, and that's really not really getting at that importance. And we know through research that importance of understanding why this is important to me on a personal level gets at engagement for kids. That's when they become a lot more engaged. The next piece has to do with differentiation, and this is hard. You know, this is hard for everybody. So I understand why it's missed because it is hard. Here's where the focus is. Differentiation of content, process, and product. 3 different things. I'm going to give you an example, and I want you to tell me if you think that this is differentiation of content, or differentiation of process, or differentiation of product. Okay? Okay. The teacher provides a menu for students to select from or to choose from to show her what they've learned.
Content.
I hear content. I hear product.
Can it be all 3?
Absolutely, it could be. I think it's more product because you're looking at the menu of choices for the kids to produce back to you.
Okay.
But it is certainly also content related, but I'm going to get at content and I think it'll make it more clear. But it's definitely, I'm giving them a choice in what kinds of things I want them to give me to show me that they've learned. That's differentiation of product. All right, next one. All the students are learning about properties of matter. One student has a Nat Geo article that he's reading, another student is reading from the textbook, and another student has a leveled reader.
Process.
What do y'all think? I'm hearing process. Why do you think it's process?
Because they're reading 3 different materials to learn the same information, so they're learning the same content. They're not producing anything yet, so it's a process.
Okay, so I'm hearing that that's process related, right? And I would also think that might be content because you're right, it's the same information. It's all properties of matter. And hopefully it's all at whatever your science teak was that it's getting at. So if your big goal, your big generalization is for them to understand that there are multiple properties of matter, including liquid, solid, and gas, then hopefully all 3 of those articles have to do with that. But it's really, the content is different. See what I'm saying? Process, yes, but content is different in all 3 of those things that you've chosen for the kids. You've now differentiated it. And the last one is the teacher sends the students back to work, and then she pulls a small group to work with her. Process, yeah, absolutely. Now you are doing something different for the kids and what they're learning, and I'm assuming that you're pulling the small group because they need extra help and the other kids are good to go, can go on. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So the 3 areas, and as long as you're doing these things, doesn't matter if you call it content, process, or product, but that you have that awareness that there are those 3 different kinds of ways you can differentiate. And it's essentially, and special ed, you guys do this all the time, how is it modified to be appropriate while maintaining the rigor? Okay, so how are you changing it in some way to make it appropriate? Okay.
And Sharon, is it the case that if you see it once during the lesson, people get credit? You don't have to continually see
That
it
is right.
throughout?
That's right. You don't have to do all 3 of these things in one lesson. That would be overwhelming. Yeah, if we see it one time in that 20 minutes, good to go. Yeah. And if we mark it as incorrect, the best part, I think, of this entire observation is the feedback conference. And so if something is marked as a denial, but you have an explanation for it, a lot of times differentiation is so embedded within your instruction that we won't even notice it. And maybe we shouldn't notice it because you don't want to point out to various kids are at different levels. So that's okay. When we sit down in our conference, that's the time for you to say, oh, did you see me do blah, blah, blah? That's what I was doing. And then we go, oh, okay, thank you. And we'll give you the credit for it. So don't be afraid in the conference, because it's really, that's the most important part about the whole observation process, is the feedback conference. And I was telling some of the people on your staff that, quite frankly, I wish I didn't have this instrument, other than it's kind of nice for me to take notes on. But I wish we didn't have to give points and numbers, but you know, it's tied to a federal grant that has to have points and numbers in order to get funding for it. Because quite frankly, I'd rather just have the conversation with you and just talk with you about it. So, all right, so all of that has to do with content design. Do you have any questions about content design? All right, moving on, content delivery. This one is all again about how you are delivering the content, which means that you're looking at the conversation. So I'm watching to see what kind of conversation are you having with the kids. So here the biggest thing for you to look at is, are you communicating with students, and is it generating thinking? So are the kinds of questions you're asking higher level to get a deeper understanding, to get the kids thinking? That's essentially purposeful student conversation. The next one is evidence of student engagement. And this is, do the kids appear to be cognitively, behaviorally, and emotionally connected to the learning? So we can't get inside their brains and see what they're thinking, but I can certainly see the behavior of the students, and if they're watching you, or if they're listening, or if they're working together. That's all evidence of student engagement. And you look for specific behaviors, like if kids are creating proximity to the teacher, in other words, if they're trying to get closer to you to listen to what you have to say, or they're ooh, 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 you know, those are the kinds of behaviors that we see when kids are engaged. And so it again has to do with what we see of the kids to get the credit for the evidence of student engagement. In terms of the seamless use of materials, that's exactly what it says. Is it organized in a way that is efficient to your instruction? In other words, you could have a great organized cabinet in the back of the room, but if that takes you a while to get to, and then you've lost track of the kids, that's not organized for efficiency. That's just an organized room. But an efficient classroom is, you know, again, I'm not saying that you wouldn't go to a cupboard and get something out of the cupboard. That could be fast. You could do it really quickly, and that could be just every day. I just run here, I got my stuff, okay, here's the manipulatives, everyone's passing it out. That's efficient. So it depends on what it is, but essentially it's where are your materials and is it quick to use. And then the other one, the last one, is the variety of instructional arrangements. And here I'm going to just highlight as appropriate. I think people are misled to believe that you have to change your grouping. Like you have to have a large group and a small group, or you have to have partners and then you have to have individuals. That's not the case. The case is your grouping appropriate for what you're teaching? If you're working with students and it's something that is more appropriate to be doing with them in a large group setting and you're doing it independently and you're walking around to each student, one, your pacing would slow down and the engagement would might go away from the other kids. But is it appropriate? And if the large group is more appropriate, we'll talk about that. Or if a small group's more appropriate, we'll talk about those kinds of things. But again, you don't have to do multiple ones if it doesn't make sense in the lesson. If it does, great. If you do a whole group instruction and then you have them go and work in partners, or you have them go and work in a small group, there you go. You've done it. Okay? Any questions on content delivery?
I have a question overall. So in aspects such as this one where you say is appropriate, so if you come in and you watch me do a whole group lesson, but I don't switch to individual or anything, and so when we sit down and we have our conversation afterward, I explain to you the whole group was appropriate because I still don't get credit for that, do I? Because you didn't see it.
You
I mean,
might,
you
yes.
might, you have to
you
wait till the
have a-
second observation or the third observation.
No, you would get credit for it. If you did it, so let me make sure I'm clear on what you're understanding, what you're asking me. Is that if you were doing a whole group lesson and you never switched it to independent or small group, are you asking would that be an automatic denial of the credit? No. No, it would not. Especially if it's appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it would not be a denial. Good question. Any other questions? All right, we're going to move a little bit faster now. This is cultural responsiveness, and this has to do essentially with the behavior of the students and your connection or your relationship with the kids. You hear that a lot, capturing kids' hearts. We talk about it in tribes training. There's just multiple research out there as to why that's good for kids. You connect with the kids. And this is what all of this is about. So how do you determine whether you're connecting with the kids? Well, one of the things is the overall culture of fairness and equality for students. Here, I'm going to just highlight equal and opportunity. Well, it's equality and opportunity, but equal opportunity for students, because that's the key there. Does everybody have equal access to the teacher? And what that means is, do you have students who can all see you from where they are? Or do you have students who are pushed to the corner, turned away with their backs to you and have to turn around to see you? That would not necessarily be equal access, because it takes that student a lot more to be able to just observe in the daily life than the students who are sitting at the table with you, or sitting at their table looking. And it really has to do too with, if a student is asking questions, does one student get picked a lot more than other students? Or is it very fair, and is it equal opportunity for all kids? So it's not just always the same one getting selected to respond, but it's multiple kids. Does that make sense? That's all that is. Respectful teacher directions. This one has to do with the attitude of trust and respect. Do you have a trusting and respectful relationship with your kids? Do you demonstrate that attitude? They may not always demonstrate it back, but do you consistently demonstrate it, even when it's difficult to do so? That's what that is. Established and fair student routines. This has to do with the implementation of the routines, and is it consistent? So, do you do for one that you don't do for another, or is it equal? Again, we go back to that equal and fair and consistent and all of that. So do you ask one student to move their clip for something, but the other child who does the same thing doesn't have to? Now, there is a difference when you're dealing with special ed students and certainly with other types of behaviors that are out of the norm. Okay, we get that. We certainly understand that. And during your conversation with us, that might come up in a feedback conference. This is why I did this differently. You have purposeful intent on why you did something differently for one than another. Yeah, that makes sense. There's a reason for it. So, and you know, not just I forgot about them or, you know, something like that. That wouldn't be so good. You know, we've had issues where someone might have been in timeout and they completely forgot about the student. Well, that's not equal opportunity for the students, and it's also not necessarily consistent routines and procedures in place. Capitalizing on students' interests has to do with really taking those teachable moments. And you know it when you see it, because a teachable moment comes up all the time when the kids are talking. And did you grab it and run with it, or did you just let it fall to the wayside? That's a teachable moment. What did you do with it? And did you make it of interest to the students? So if a student is bringing something up, that's interesting to them. There's a reason for that. Now, you also know that I also know the difference between just trying to interrupt, to manipulate, to interrupt you. We understand that too. But did you miss an opportunity? That's what capitalizing on their interests has to do with. And then the last piece of cultural responsiveness is strong teacher-student connections. Are you building those relationships? And especially in the first of the year, like right now, building those relationships, we see it in the classrooms. So, any questions on cultural responsiveness? All right, moving on to classroom standards. Here's the easiest ones to get. Easy peasy, easy peasy. Class guidelines. Did you post the classroom rules somewhere where the kids can see it? That's it. It can be a social contract. Is it the rules of the class? Are they up? That's it. The next one is the room arranged in a way that supports discussion or sharing of ideas? So in this place, what we're looking at is are the kids in rows, or are the kids in groups where they can actually talk to each other? It's how your room is arranged to support discussion. The next one is the learning goal. Did you post the objective? And it's great if you can use them to target and focus instruction and you actually refer to them. Great. But the main idea is it posted? Is it up there for kids to see? That's it.
And so about legibility and size, like you're talking about.
Yes, and they need to be able to read it. And here's the reason why. You want kids to be referring to these posters like it's a natural thing every day. So if I'm working on math, I can be reminded because I can actually read it. Oh yeah, remember we're working on, this is what I'm doing. So it's just a really good reminder for them. So it really does have to be able to be readable from anywhere in the classroom, especially where the kids are sitting. All right. The last piece is basically we wrote these for Round Rock ISD's special emphases. And what these are, essentially no other school district is going to have these on their Snapshot tool because they don't have an ARC, or they may not have an ARC. But the main point here is, first of all, are you teaching the information at the right time? In other words, when you're teaching that, is that when they said to teach it in the ARC? And usually they give you like a 3 to 6 to 9 week window sometimes. So essentially, if you're doing it within that time frame, you get the credit for it. The other piece is it at the appropriate content level? or the correct level of instruction. So there's two parts. One, is it at the right time? And two, is it at the right level of what's asked for in the ARC? And then the last one on here is, have you given the kids the opportunity to talk about their learning or academic content? And here, we're really looking for more student talk, less teacher talk. If you've gone to Gomez and Gomez's training, for dual language, or if you've had, of course, the work with Marzano is all about building background knowledge, which has to do with academic conversations. And we're actually going to be purchasing for every campus, a RRISE campus. Jeff Zwires has written a book on academic conversations. And it really talks about, let's see what it's about how to plan discussion-based lessons for diverse language learners. And I'm going to show you in a minute a resource that you can use to access these books as well, but we're going to buy that one for your professional library. And really, it's just giving the kids the time to turn and talk to each other. And so if you do it one time in your lesson, you get credit for it. You don't have to do it multiple times. It's just, did you give them an opportunity to talk about what they're learning? So any questions on curriculum? All right, I'm going to show you really quickly this cool site because you may know this, but if you're new, you probably don't. If you know, you go to the Round Rock ISD website, and when you go to the Round Rock ISD website, you click on Employee if you're an employee, and it changes the screen to blue. Okay? So now I've got this blue screen for employees. If you go to Resources for Teachers, and you go down to Research Resources, there's a couple of things under Research Resources, and you want to go to Professional Resources. Under Professional Resources, there's something called the Gale Professional Collection, and that's through ASCD, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development. And ASCD has all these books that you can read. And it's really cool. It's just like, your Kindle or whatever. It has the books there, and you click on the book and you can read a chapter at a time. It's the whole book, but you can only download a chapter at a time. So here are some really cool books for you. I've been talking so much about that Building Background Knowledge from Robert Marzano. Here's his book. And you can go, and everyone in Round Rock ISD has free access to this book, Building Background Knowledge from Robert Marzano. Now when you go, you need to go to Table of Contents because you can only download a chapter at a time. So you have to go to the Table of Contents first. So if I want to read this chapter, and this is kind of good too because let's say you don't want to read the whole book, you only want to read chapter 5. You go to the Importance of Background Knowledge, and here it tells you the subheadings of all of it. But I can email it to myself if I want to read it at home, or I can just download it here, and I hit download. Let's see if it opens it up. And here is the chapter on the importance of background knowledge. So these books are all right here, free for you to use. Under Gale Professional Collection. I'm going to go back and show you because one of the other books that I just really quickly mentioned, I think it's under here, is, and actually I was talking to a teacher earlier this morning, and we were talking about habits of mind, and so I actually just told her that if she was interested, the Habits of Mind is on the Gale Resources if she's interested in learning more about it. But we also talked about that, let's see, Content Area Conversations is what it's called. It's on here too. Here it is. This book is Content Area Conversations. So again, I click it, it comes up, I download the chapter, I'm good to go. So lots of really good books on there. I would recommend highly. Okay, any questions? I know I went through that quickly. You know, you have 3 observations, 2 are done by me. I do everyone on this campus twice, and then it's either Lucy or I think Darla who splits up everyone else for their 3rd observation. I will do your first one, and I think if we did it like we did last year, I will do your 3rd one, and then the 2nd one is the one that is different. And for each of these observations, you can earn up to $1,500. That's the total, $1,500. I'm sorry, not each. The total is $1,500. So you have the opportunity to earn 30 points for each observation. And if you look at the last page of your observation sheet, you'll see the last page gives you the total amounts that it takes to get at each of the ratings. Expert level is where the 1,500 comes in. Proficient is 1,000. Progressing is 500. Unacceptable is no money. So 1,500, 1,000, 500, none. All right. In our conversation, one last thing. In our conversation, when we have our feedback conference, we'll go through your strengths and we'll talk about the things that you're interested in growing on. And what we do with this is then afterwards, Linda, this is one of the great things about your master teacher. Your master teacher can help you with these. Once we've kind of identified some areas that you might be interested in growing more on and learning more about, that's where your master teacher is really super helpful at helping you grow further. Okay? All right, any questions? Yes?
So, do we decide upon the observation time, or do you just pop in, or how does that?
Good question. No, we just come in. We'll give you the window of time. It's harder this year because in the past it's always been basically a 2-week window, but because I'm doing the entire campus, it's more like a month window. So I will always email, and everyone should have gotten an email, but I think you weren't here yet. Everyone should have gotten an email that had the Snapshot tool on it and that said I was coming and the date I was coming. I will not be starting with the new folks on this campus until Wednesday of next week. That's the first time that I'll be coming into anyone who's new to the campus. Wednesday of next week. I know it's an early release day, so don't worry. And one of the things that I ask, and that is critical of any observer, is that if there is something unusual that's going on, and we send you an email and say, we're coming, we'll be on your campus, send us an email that says what's weird or what's going on. You know, I'm going to the library at a different time than I was going before. I'm going to the computer lab, or we're doing this or we're doing that. You know, or I've got a benchmark test. That's a big one. You know, let us know so that we don't come during that time. It helps us and it helps you. So you kind of know a little bit more. In this case, you'll know that for you all, because it's the new teachers to the campus, it'll be about 2 weeks instead of a month window like it will be at the next observations. But for you all, I've already been here for about 2 weeks. So, 2 weeks more.
One thing I wanted to add is about the conversations afterwards, is that you usually try to plan them like sometimes during conference times, but
Yes.
if people are doing planning with your grade level team, that takes priority over the
Yes.
conversation. So like school stuff, you know, anything that's obligatory, do
Yes.
that first and then meet.
Yes, we can always reschedule. If it seems kind of overwhelming, let me share with you that there are many indicators that all are connected. Efficient pacing of instructional time, student routines and management, suitable, appropriate student movement, evidence of student engagement, overall culture of fairness and equality, respectful teacher directions, established and fair student routines, and even teacher-student connections. That's 8. That's 8. They're really all very connected. So 8 out of 30, when it's done really well, you get all of those 8 points. So a lot of times they're very interconnected. So don't feel like these are 30 separate things I have to do, but rather look at it as a big picture. There's some pretty big picture items in this Snapshot tool to help you. Okay?
Of course, we're striving for ease.
say proficient is where it's at.
When we
I
do
would strive.
PDOS, that's what they tell us in our training.
Yes,
Proficient is where we want people.
yes.
And I know you want that, it sees the expectations, but truly, proficient is a very good teacher.
Absolutely. Proficient is the expectation that we have for Round Rock ISD teachers, which is already high. That's what we expect, proficient. That's great. That's really great. Also, don't think of this too in terms of PDOS, because this is different. There are similarities, and so the good thing is that if you have an observation with me before Lisa comes in or your AP comes in, then you'll get some ideas already on what to do, and then it will even be better. But remember, this is just additional money for you. This isn't, we're not taking your salary away from you if you don't do well on these. We're giving you more money. So think of this as, this is an extra bonus, yahoo, to what I get with my salary. This is a little more.
I will too.
I know.
And you can't, and I know, I take
Yeah.
things very
Because that's
personally too, but you
average.
just, yeah.
You don't
Right.
strive for average.
But it's not.
Perfectionist by nature.
Right.
But it's not average. If you look at 60 to 79 points out of a total of 90, that's not average. That's the top third.
But that's a C.
Oh,
But you
Lord.
aren't starting at 100, you're starting at
starting at
90,
100,
so
that's
it's
right.
really in the B range.
That's right.
Yeah.
With the
Yay!
curve. With the curve.
Yay.
Okay.
You gotta look at it
That's
in
right.
the right perspective.
That's
Right.
right.
And I think I want to share is that insofar as expert, there's very few people. I'm thinking that's probably like, it's less than about 10% that get
Yes.
that. So it's
Yes.
thinking about that, it's kind of like, okay,
Yes.
fine.
But I will tell you too, just if you're curious, there is a breakout really of the scores, but I think there were only maybe two, I think I will save this too. There were only 2 unacceptable out of all the teachers that we see, which is a lot. 2 observations, I think, that were unacceptable, not even 2 teachers, 2 observations.
Yeah.
And everything else was in the progressing proficient, and then there was I can't remember the percentage, but I want to say 15% that were in the exceeds or expert range. So, yay. That's good. All right. Any other questions? I know I've kept you almost an hour, but hopefully you have a better understanding of what the Classroom Snapshot tool is and how we use it. Great.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.